In the heart of 17th century Europe, the world seemed perpetually on the brink. Kings lost their thrones, armies marched and vanished, and ordinary people learned that yesterday's order could vanish overnight. For generations, the question was not whether you had a voice in government, but whether you'd survive long enough to remember the name of your king. Against this backdrop of upheaval, three thinkers, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Montesquieu, began a conversation that would lay the groundwork for the modern world. They were not politicians or generals. They were, in a way, architects, each designing a new structure for society, one sturdy enough to weather the storms of human nature, yet open enough to nurture liberty. You might say they built with blueprints, not slogans. First was Thomas Hobbes. Writing in the shadow of the English Civil War, Hobbes looked at the chaos around him and saw a fundamental truth. When there is no authority to keep the peace, life becomes, as he put it, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes didn't just imagine this, he lived it. For him, the social contract was less a theory than a form of survival instinct. In his view, the state wasn't a villain. It was the night watchman, not a cheerful vision, but a man surrounded by civil war. You could forgive him for favoring strong locks and thick walls. But Hobbes' vision, for all its stark realism, left little room for liberty, the task that would fall to Locke. Living through another revolution, Locke looked at the idea of the social contract and transformed it. Where Hobbes saw government as the guardrail, Locke saw it as the hired help. Government's legitimacy, Locke argued, rested not on fear, but on consent. The voluntary agreement of free individuals. Rights weren't favors from the powerful. They were baked in from the beginning. Government existed to protect what you already possessed. And if the government forgot its job description, Locke had a simple answer: find a new one. Locke's vision reached across the Atlantic, shaping the words and the spirit of the American founding. Here, government was not the master, but the servant. Its authority was real, but always bounded by law and by the rights of the governed. Yet Hobbes and Locke knew that power, once created, tends to grow. Enter Montesquieu, the French jurist with a keen eye for history and human nature. Montesquieu wasn't much for speeches. He preferred floor plans. In his great work, The Spirit of the Laws, he argued that the only way to keep power in check was to divide it: executive, legislative, and judicial, each branch with its own duties and limits, each able to balance the others. Montesquieu's insight wasn't a call for gridlock, but for resilience. Trust us, yes, but always with a backstop. The genius of the American founders lay in adopting Montesquieu's blueprint, not to destroy power, but to channel it towards resilience, stability, and liberty. They were engineers as much as revolutionaries, determined to give freedom not just a voice, but a sturdy house to live in. What ties these three together is not just the notion of a contract, but a deeper trust in the possibility of ordered liberty. Hobbes teaches us the value of stability and state capacity, reminding us that a society too weak to protect itself soon loses more than its freedom. Locke defends the dignity of the individual and the necessity of government by consent. Montesquieu gives us the architecture of restraint, a design that channels power, tempers its excesses, and ensures resilience across generations. For them, liberty and order weren't rivals. They were reluctant partners at the same dance, keeping each other on their toes. These are not dusty ideas for scholars alone. They shape our daily lives, our constitutions, and our debates over security and freedom. The social contract endures because it is, at its core, a living negotiation between order and liberty, strength and restraint. When we debate how much power the state should wield or weigh individual rights against collective security, we're still in conversation with Hobbes, Locke, and Montesquieu. Today, as technology accelerates and societies become ever more complex, the challenge remains. It is not enough to demand liberty without structure, nor to insist on order without accountability. The lessons of the social contract is the lesson of balance, of institutions that can endure crisis, adapt to change, and always return to the promise of liberty under law. In the American tradition, this is not simply a theory, it's a living inheritance, built and rebuilt by each generation. Ronald Reagan, in his best moments, reminded us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction, not to alarm, but to inspire. The contract holds only if we renew it, not with fear, but with confidence, with the steady faith that ordered liberty is possible and worth the effort. And so the story continues, not with grand pronouncements, but with quiet agreements, with laws written and rewritten, with institutions that outlast any single crisis or leader. The social contract, like its true covenant, endures not because it is perfect, but because it is repaired, reaffirmed, and passed on. Liberty, like any good inheritance, survives because we care enough to keep working at it. That is the promise of Hobbes, Locke, and Montesquieu, a society strong enough to protect itself, free enough to allow its people to thrive, and wise enough to balance the two. In an age of uncertainty, this is a legacy worth honoring.